Hello, U.S. history students. Here we're going to do a video lesson about the Constitution, right? About ratifying it and adding some key pieces. So, it's one thing to write the darn thing, to design it and write it. It's another thing to bring it into legal reality. And then one of the first pieces of business under the new Constitution is to add something to it, something called the Bill of Rights, which is perhaps the most beloved aspect of the Constitution itself today, and probably the most well-known for regular Americans. We're going to explore how that came to be. So these through lines of being order discoverers and seekers of justice, I think we're going to get a little mental workout with some of these things. And I'm going to go ahead and jump in and tell you these stories now. So look, the Constitutional Convention designs this Constitution, and it's at the end of it, it stipulates, this is a draft. This is a proposal for a new type of government. And once 9 of the 13 states have ratified it or formally approved it, then it will become law. And that's a slow process that will take a few years, and it'll take a lot of arguing and bargaining and negotiating. But in the process of this national debate over should we ratify the new Constitution or stay with the Articles of Confederation, we will see the emergence of our first kind of political parties. They're temporary at first, but of course we know that these parties will become permanent. And we also see the emergence of the Bill of Rights. So here's our situation. When this Constitution sort of goes public, when it hits the newspapers, when it becomes fodder for debate, it's just immediately the most charged political conversation of the day. It is the topic of conversation. Like, should we go with this plan for a new, more powerful national government, or is that too dangerous? And the people who supported this new Constitution called themselves Federalists. And they kind of had a bit of a jump start because the Federalists were primarily people who were, leaders of the Constitutional Convention, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, of course, first and foremost, and then people with big names like George Washington, Ben Franklin. And, they're going to do a blitz in the media. And they're going to write lots of these essays, famous essays called the Federalists Papers. And their arguments are going to go along a few lines, but if I can just sort of broadly summarize, I'd say their arguments sound like this. First off, name it. The Articles of Confederation stinks. It had failed. It didn't work. It was leaving the country in a precarious situation. This is a country in crisis if it does not solve its governing problem, and this new Constitution is the remedy to that major problem. They say, I know, look, Americans, I get it. We're touchy. We're nervous about large government, right? Big government, more powerful national government, given what we experienced before the revolution. Sure, that's fair. At the same time, we need some national government power, like a government that can't tax at all is perpetually in economic crisis. A government that can't muster a national military puts this nation itself at risk, which puts all of our rights at risk. Like, we need a more powerful government to tackle the big problems we're facing, and frankly, to sort of fulfill our national potential, which is considerable. And then, Madison especially, and Hamilton to an extent, said, look, I know you're nervous about more powerful government, but read the darn thing. Read this Constitution. You'll find we built it with all kinds of nifty mechanisms that force different stakeholders and factions to share power with each other, to prevent any one faction from becoming too powerful. All these, checks and balances, separation of powers will serve to prevent tyranny. And so you are safe under this new system. America, we should vote. We should vote to ratify this. And they're encouraging the states to do that. On the flip side, you have the emergence of this other, what became a political party. And this other political party that's forming in opposition to the Constitution comes up with a not very creative or catchy name for itself. They call themselves the Anti-Federalists. And look, there were some noteworthy Anti-Federalists. There is, Patrick Henry, famous, for saying, give me liberty or give me death. There's Samuel Adams, the famous rabble-rouser, son of liberty from Boston in the Stamp Act days. There's even Thomas Jefferson. And he's doing this quietly because he lives in Europe at the time. But Thomas Jefferson is quietly supportive of the anti-federalist movement. And look, the anti-federalists are arguing from a posture of fear or concern, but this is sometimes wise because they're saying, look, what I'm worried about is this. I'm worried that we fought a terrible war that took a long time. It was enormously costly. We pulled a rabbit out of a hat and created our own country and our own new system of government. And now we're going to hand our dearly bought liberties over to some new, powerful, more distant national government. Like, we're just going to give it all away. I don't want to give it all away. These liberties that we fought for are too valuable. We have to cherish them. And what they're arguing is that the Constitution is going to create this national government that, look, it's farther away from the people, literally and figuratively. It's like it's more distant from the people than their local state governments. And power is safer if it's closer to the people, lower to the ground. All right. And they're worried that, like, this new national government, it's just going to, in the end, kind of swallow up the states. The differences between the states will disappear. The states themselves will become just kind of states on paper. But in effect, the national government's going to end up swallowing everything up because it has all these powers to do what it would like to do. And they just worried that, like, look, here's what happens with a more powerful national government that can tax. The rich and the powerful in our country are going to sidle up next to it to get the favors that they want. They're going to get what they want, and we, the regular people, are going to get hosed over, right? We're going to get overlooked. And it's just going to become kind of Parliament 2.0. That's sort of their concerns in general. And finally, they said, look, all right, Mr. Smarty Pants, James Madison, we did read the Constitution. We read the draft. And look, it's a lot of nifty stuff in it. I read a bunch of stuff. You know what I never read in the whole thing? I never once read anywhere where it specifically lists what our rights are, where it specifically lists what our rights are that the government will never be allowed to touch. And you're telling me to trust you and that you built in the right mechanisms to prevent government tyranny. I would feel a lot safer from government tyranny if there was some sort of list of, like, government no touches, like you say to a little 2-year-old who's going to put their finger in the light socket, like some list of no touches where the government is never allowed to do this. If there were to be that in there, I might feel less nervous, but I don't see that in there. And so I'm pretty nervous. So the anti-federalists are pushing back, cautioning Americans to be worried about more powerful national government. And what happens is a bunch of states rush to ratify, but not 9, not all of them. And so in order to kind of get over the hump to hit the 9 states that have to ratify or approve, the Federalists go to the negotiating table and say to the anti-federalists, tell you what, gang, how about this? Why don't you ratify? Approve the Constitution, we'll establish this new government, and the first order of business in this new government would be to add that list of perpetual rights that you talked about, right? And if we offered that, would you be willing to ratify? And at that point, enough anti-federalists said, okay, you got yourself a deal. We will vote to ratify as long as we get to be part of that process of establishing that list of rights that are going to be permanently protected. And we have there a great example of American compromise working to allow the process to move forward. And sure enough, once the Constitution is ratified, Madison begins work on what would become the Bill of Rights, these 10 first amendments to the Constitution. And these aren't just going to be regular laws that can be passed by Congress. These are amendments to the Constitution. They're carved into the Constitution itself. It's as permanent as we can make it. Once these are in the Constitution, the only way to amend them or remove them would be to get 2/3 of Congress to agree and 3/4 of the states. And that's not impossible, but it's very, very difficult. This list of our rights, this list of no touches, government, and you are not allowed to touch this and that. This list is as permanent as we get this side of eternity in our political system. And their presence in our system is a testament to the anti-federalists. The anti-federalists who kind of lost the debate, but in the end, they got the Bill of Rights inserted in there. And that's kind of an enormous win. Again, the compromise piece is pretty nifty here. Now, of these amendments, they're not necessarily all of equal significance, mainly because the First Amendment is a doozy. The First Amendment is enormously consequential in terms of what it promises Americans and what it forbids government from doing. Let's read it aloud here. The First Amendment reads, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So Congress is never going to establish an official state religion. The official religion of America is this. Everybody should practice Christianity, or everyone should participate in this particular expression of Christianity. And Congress also will not prohibit the expression of any religion. So the U.S. government cannot prohibit any particular religion or say that any particular religion is out of bounds. This is free expression of religion. People can follow their own religious conscience in the United States of America. Continuing, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. So here, it's like the government is not going to be able to limit the freedom of speech. Government is not going to stop or prohibit people from expressing something. Now, when you express something, ladies and gentlemen, there might be social consequences. People might say, I disagree, or they might argue with you, or they might say you're a jerk or an idiot or a fool. Well, that's fair play. That's what free speech is kind of messy sometimes. You can have real consequences. You can have professional consequences. Folks, I could say something right now that would get me fired from my job at Southwest Christian High School because it doesn't meet the particular code of conduct that I'm asked to sign and live up to. If that were to happen and I get fired for what I expressed, I couldn't say free speech, First Amendment protects me. No, the First Amendment protects me from going to jail for what I say. The First Amendment protects me from being, rounded up by the police. It doesn't protect me from losing my job. It doesn't protect me from other people not liking what I have to say. It just means the government is never going to go after people's speech. Government is never going to prohibit people's speech. This is enormous. The United States of America has the widest protections for speech that in the world today. And it's like carved into our Constitution that we're just going to have a lot of dissent and disagreement and argument. That's what free speech gives us. Again, though, that doesn't protect us from private consequences, right? Like Twitter might say, well, you can't say that here, and they can throw you out. Well, Twitter's a private company. They're not the government. They can do that. Or X, forgive me. But the government, what's not going to happen is the government or the state or the police aren't going to go after me. The press, free press. The government can't go after the press. It can't censor the media. That's pretty straightforward. They can't take someone off the news because they reported stuff that they didn't like. It's like part of being president in the United States today is you get to be the most criticized person in the United States because the government can't censor the press or the media. That's prohibited from doing so by virtue of the First Amendment. And these last two, Congress shall make no law regarding the regarding the right of the people peaceably to assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances. This just means people have a right to peaceably assemble, peaceably protest, petition the government, like say, demand something to be different. We have the right to make noise. We have the right to protest as long as it's peaceful. I mean, once we start throwing Molotov cocktails, setting fires, throwing rocks at the police, well, this ain't peaceful anymore, and this is no longer our First Amendment right. But if we are doing this peacefully, guess what? The police will actually protect us. We have a right to peaceably assemble and petition the government. All this means, by the way, that we're just going to have a noisy system with lots of media criticisms, lots of protests, lots of speech critical of this and that, and the government is just calling a truce and saying the government is not going to have any power to go after you for that, right? And if you don't like it or if you disagree with it, then time to start arguing the other side, right? Time to make an argument yourself. Now, when you look at the other items in the Bill of Rights, I will just say, this is like a simplified list here. The First Amendment we dug into a little bit, and that is enormously significant. The Second Amendment famously says we have the right to bear arms. We have the right to possess weapons for self-defense. You will watch a video in a little bit that'll unpack that a tiny bit more. The Third Amendment's a funny one that just says the citizens have a right to not be forced to house soldiers in our homes, which goes back to the intolerable acts during the Revolutionary period, where Parliament forced citizens to quarter soldiers. And the 4th through 8th Amendments are kind of funny just because they're all there to protect people who've been accused of crimes. And you might say, why do we need to protect people who are accused? Why do we need all these amendments to protect the bad guys, right? Why do we need all these laws to protect people who've been accused of crimes and accused of, if we find evidence about the bad guys through some unlikely, or through an illegal means, or, anyway, why do we have all these laws for people who've been accused of crimes? And the best answer is to protect you if you are ever accused of a crime that you didn't commit. The 4th through 8th Amendments are called the Due Process Amendments. And heaven forbid you or I is ever accused of a crime that we didn't commit. The police are not able to just barge into our home without a warrant. The police are not able to keep their evidence from us or have some sort of like show trial or sham trial. The government is not able to declare our guilt or innocence. We have a right to trial by jury, and a jury of other citizens will decide if I'm guilty or innocent. We have a right to a fair trial, which means we have a right to have a lawyer defend us. So students, heaven forbid, if you are ever accused of something you didn't do, the 4th through 8th Amendments are there in our system to protect you. The Due Process Amendments are part of a calculation, students, where in the American system, we say we'd rather have a few guilty people maybe go free than have innocent people end up in jail. Now, do innocent people end up in jail? Yes, that happens. That is a travesty of justice in our system. That's no good. We don't want that. But our whole system is skewed to protect people who've been accused of crimes, to make sure that the state really has to clear a high hurdle to put you in jail. So they really need to present a case that's pretty good and convince your peers, your fellow citizens, of your guilt. Okay. So when we think back and we step back on this country that's been established and being created, we see a nation that has emerged in the colonial period. We talked about the enterprising spirit of the colonists, the weird diversity and pluralism that emerges during that time, and the peculiar religiousness of some of the early colonists. The Declaration of Independence and the American Revolution established the primacy of the rights of liberty, individual human rights, and that the purpose of government is to protect those rights. In our Constitution, we establish popular sovereignty, that power ultimately comes from the people, and the power of government is limited. It is held in check by law, by the Constitution. And we split power between different factions and groups in our system to prevent one group from tyrannizing the others. And finally, here in the Bill of Rights, we see that there are certain rights that are so important that we're not putting them up for a vote. Right? They're just not subject to they're not subject to a popular vote. I don't care if 51% of the country or 58% of the country says we need to get rid of freedom of religion. We ain't getting rid of freedom of religion because it's carved into the First Amendment. I don't care if 58% of the country says I think lawyers are scum and we shouldn't, we should be able to put people on trial and throw them in jail without lawyers present. It's there. It's present in the Bill of Rights now. Like, it is not subject to a popular vote. Those are your rights. They're not up for a vote. So we see these values emerge in our founding period. Students, I'm going to have you follow up by watching a couple little supplementary videos that go deeper on a couple ideas here and ask you to complete the Bill of Rights scrapbook page. Thank you so much for your great work on this, and I'll see you soon enough. Bye, guys.